Before diving into what the final goodbye really means, it helps to understand that it is not simply about walking away. It is about the moment when the narcissist realizes they can no longer convince themselves that they still have control. For months or even many years, the relationship has often followed the same pattern. Everything has revolved around control. Sometimes that control is obvious. They may try to influence your choices, your actions, or even the people around you. But most of the time, it is much more subtle. It is emotional and psychological control. It is the belief that your thoughts, your feelings, and even your attention should always circle back to them. This belief becomes the center of how they operate. They rely on it more than most people realize. It is the place where they collect emotional energy and reassurance. The moment you truly decide to leave without looking back or reopening the same painful conversations, that entire system begins to weaken. The pattern they depended on starts falling apart. Stay with this because what happens next explains why a real goodbye often affects them in ways they never expected. People who behave this way usually do not have a strong inner sense of who they are. Their confidence does not come from genuine peace, healthy values, or meaningful purpose. Most emotionally healthy people can survive rejection because they still have a life that supports them. They have friendships, personal goals, family connections, or a quiet belief in themselves that helps them recover. A narcissist often lacks that kind of inner foundation. Instead, their identity is built from the reactions of other people. Imagine a room covered with mirrors, where every reflection depends on someone standing in front of it. The compliments, attention, admiration, fear, and emotional reactions they receive become those reflections. Without them, everything begins to look empty. When those reflections disappear, the image they created starts breaking apart. That is why a final goodbye feels much bigger than simple rejection. It shakes the version of themselves they worked so hard to maintain. It feels as though something inside them is disappearing because they no longer have someone constantly confirming the role they believed they deserved. Keep watching because this next part reveals why they often react in ways that seem confusing after you leave. Control is not just something they enjoy. It becomes part of how they stay emotionally stable. The relationship was rarely built on mutual love, respect, or emotional safety. Instead, it often centered around keeping you emotionally connected to their world. As long as you stayed attached, they continued feeling important, powerful, and significant. Your reactions reminded them that they still mattered. But when you quietly step away and refuse to return to the same cycle, everything changes. Suddenly, they are left with themselves. That is the place they try hardest to avoid. Silence becomes uncomfortable because there is no longer another person's attention filling the emptiness. They may distract themselves with new people, new conflicts, or fresh sources of validation, but none of it completely replaces the control they believed they had over you. Being alone with their own thoughts forces them toward feelings they have spent years avoiding. That inner emptiness becomes much harder to ignore. This is why many people misunderstand what happens after a real ending. It is not simply the loss of a relationship. It is the loss of a system that helped them avoid facing themselves. And that realization can be far more unsettling than they ever expected. There is something else that many people overlook. Not every goodbye creates this kind of emotional impact. Some people leave physically, but remain emotionally tied to the relationship. They continue replying to messages. They argue. They defend themselves. They explain their choices over and over again. They react whenever the narcissist reaches out. Even if those conversations are filled with anger or frustration, the emotional connection is still alive. From the narcissist's point of view, that means the door has not completely closed. Every response becomes proof that they can still influence your emotions. That connection continues feeding the cycle. A true goodbye looks very different. It is calm. It is consistent. It removes the emotional thread that once connected both people. There are no endless explanations, no repeated battles, no desperate attempts to prove who was right. There is simply distance, silence, and a quiet decision to protect your own peace. Ironically, that calm response becomes one of the greatest challenges to their illusion of control, because there is nothing left for them to pull, nothing left to provoke, and nothing left to manipulate. If this message is helping you see these patterns more clearly, stay until the end, because understanding this final piece may completely change the way you view closure forever. The silence you leave behind often becomes the hardest thing for them to accept because it removes the control they believed would always exist. Imagine a hunter suddenly realizing the target has completely vanished. The hunt does not simply end without emotion. Restlessness begins. Frustration grows. Desperation slowly takes over because the chase itself has become part of survival. In a similar way, the narcissist depends on your continued involvement in their emotional world. As long as you keep reacting, explaining, defending yourself, or returning to old conversations, they still feel connected to you. But once that cycle truly ends, they are left exposed in a way they never expected. They have not only lost your presence, they have also lost the emotional structure that convinced them they were important, powerful, and always in charge. This is why the end often feels far more intense for them than it appears from the outside. Their reactions may seem dramatic, but underneath those reactions lies something much deeper. Keep watching, because the next part explains why those responses often look so extreme. After a genuine goodbye, their behavior can change in surprising ways. You may see emotional outbursts, sudden anger, complete denial, attempts to get revenge, or even emotional pleas that seem completely unlike the person you once knew. At first glance, these reactions appear different, but they usually come from the same place. They are all attempts to regain the control that has slipped away. They are not only grieving the relationship, they are struggling with the collapse of the identity they spent years building around that relationship. The final goodbye forces them to face a truth they worked very hard to avoid. It exposes the reality that the control they believed they had was never as strong as they imagined. Ironically, the very thing they fought hardest to protect becomes the first thing they lose. Their desperate efforts to pull you back do not reveal confidence or strength. They reveal fear hidden beneath years of pretending to be untouchable. Once you understand this pattern, many of their actions begin making much more sense. Stay with this, because the final piece changes the entire picture. When every argument has ended, every emotional game has stopped, and your goodbye is real, they often experience something far deeper than ordinary sadness. It can feel as though the world they carefully created is beginning to fall apart around them. For so long, they believed they were the center of everything, the person whose presence defined your choices and emotions. When that belief is broken, they resist it with incredible intensity, because accepting it would require accepting a version of themselves they have spent years trying to escape. Eventually, however, one truth becomes impossible to avoid. No false image can survive forever. No carefully managed illusion lasts forever. When you choose peace instead of returning to the cycle, their illusion slowly loses its power. At the same time, something important happens for you. You begin reclaiming your own freedom. The relationship no longer defines your emotional world. Instead of carrying their expectations, you begin rebuilding your own life. That is why the final goodbye represents much more than the end of a relationship. It marks the end of an illusion. It closes one chapter while opening another. And that is exactly why it matters so much. One of the first things many people notice after making a real final goodbye is not only the loss of the narcissist's control, but also the intense wave of anger that often follows. This kind of anger is very different from normal frustration. Healthy anger usually appears after someone feels hurt, disappointed, or misunderstood. It can be discussed, understood, and eventually released. Narcissistic rage follows a different path. It often arrives suddenly. It feels overwhelming. It comes from a place much deeper than the situation itself. Your decision to leave is not seen as a simple breakup or rejection. Instead, it feels like a personal attack against the identity they created. From their point of view, your goodbye challenges the image they believed about themselves. They convinced themselves they were unique, superior, and impossible to replace. They believed they would always remain at the center of your life. The moment you quietly walk away, that belief begins to crack. Rather than accepting what has happened, they often respond with anger, because anger feels easier than facing painful truth. If this is making sense, stay until the end, because the next part reveals why that anger can take so many different forms. Many people who develop these behaviors never learned healthy ways to manage painful emotions. Long ago, they found ways to hide feelings of shame, rejection, abandonment, or deep insecurity by creating a larger-than-life image of confidence, importance, and superiority. That image became a shield protecting them from emotions they did not know how to handle. When your final goodbye breaks through that shield, those hidden feelings begin rising to the surface again. Rage becomes a defense. It distracts them from the painful reality that they are no longer controlling the situation, and that the powerful image they protected for so long was built on something fragile. This anger can appear in many different ways. Sometimes it is loud through shouting, insults, harsh accusations, or threats designed to provoke a reaction. Other times it becomes quiet and calculated through long periods of silence, emotional withdrawal, passive-aggressive behavior, or carefully planned attempts to pull you back into the same cycle. No matter which form it takes, the purpose is often the same. It is an attempt to recover the control they believe has been taken away. Once you recognize that pattern, it becomes much easier to protect your peace instead of getting pulled back into the emotional storm. Sometimes their anger does not come through shouting or open conflict at all. Instead, it appears as personal attacks, rumors, gossip, or quiet attempts to turn friends, relatives, or mutual connections against you. In other situations, they step into the role of the victim. They tell others they were deeply hurt, misunderstood, or abandoned while carefully hiding the anger that exists beneath the surface. Although these behaviors look different, they usually grow from the same emotional place. They struggle to accept that you are no longer supporting the story they created about themselves. One of the most surprising parts of narcissistic rage is how extreme it often seems compared to the situation. Someone watching from the outside may wonder why a breakup or simple goodbye could lead to such dramatic reactions. But this is not an ordinary ending. It is the collapse of an identity that depended on constant attention, validation, and emotional control. From their perspective, your departure feels much bigger than one person leaving another. It feels as though the world they believed they controlled is slipping away. Keep watching, because understanding this next point may completely change the way you see these reactions. If you have lived through this experience, you know how confusing it can become. The intensity of their anger can slowly make you question your own judgment. You may wonder whether you really were selfish, uncaring, or responsible for everything that went wrong. That confusion is often part of the pattern. Their anger is not only an emotional reaction, it can also become a way of pulling you back into familiar roles where you explain yourself, defend your decisions, or try once again to make them understand. Every response gives them another opportunity to reconnect emotionally. That is why standing firm during these moments is both incredibly difficult and deeply important. Their anger is usually not about your value as a person. It is about what your absence forces them to face. Your independence shines a light on the emptiness they have tried for years to avoid. Instead of facing those uncomfortable feelings directly, they often project them outward through blame, criticism, accusations, or emotional attacks because blaming someone else feels easier than confronting themselves. Once you begin recognizing this pattern, something powerful starts to happen. You slowly step outside the emotional game they hoped would continue forever. Stay with this because the next insight explains why their reactions reveal much more than they intend. In many ways, narcissistic rage becomes an unexpected confession. Without realizing it, they reveal the vulnerability they worked so hard to keep hidden. Beneath the confidence, the arrogance, and the appearance of superiority often lives an overwhelming fear. They fear becoming unimportant. They fear abandonment. Most of all, they fear facing themselves without someone constantly reflecting back the image they desperately want to believe. Their anger often appears strongest at the exact moment that inner fear becomes impossible to hide. The mask begins slipping even while they try harder than ever to appear powerful. That is why a genuine final goodbye changes everything. When you remain calm despite the anger, when you refuse to return to the old emotional cycle, you are doing much more than ending a relationship. You are refusing to participate in a pattern that depended on your reactions. In that moment, you begin reclaiming something they never wanted you to fully discover: your freedom, your emotional confidence, and your ability to move forward without remaining trapped inside their world. Remember this because it matters. Their rage is not proof of real power. It is often a sign of deep desperation. Once you clearly understand that difference, many of their attempts to manipulate you lose the influence they once had. When the goodbye has finally been spoken and the anger has either exploded or slowly faded, many narcissists move into another stage. This stage is often more subtle. Instead of obvious hostility, they begin using carefully planned efforts to regain influence over you. Sometimes these actions appear kind, thoughtful, or even sincere. On the surface, they may look like genuine attempts to reconnect, but underneath the goal usually remains the same. They want to pull you back into their emotional world. This happens because they often view relationships differently from emotionally healthy people. Rather than seeing them as partnerships built on respect, trust, and mutual care, they may see them as systems where attention, emotional energy, and influence confirm their importance. When you leave, that source of validation disappears. The emotional injury this creates can feel deeply unsettling, so they immediately begin searching for ways to restore what they have lost. If this sounds familiar, keep listening, because the next part reveals the most common strategy they often use after the relationship ends. Many people are surprised that the narcissist does not simply disappear after the breakup. Instead, they often return with completely different tactics. One of the best-known patterns is called hoovering. The idea is simple. They try to draw you back into contact by whatever method seems most likely to work. Sometimes they suddenly become warm, charming, and affectionate, reminding you of the version of themselves you first fell for. Other times they rely on guilt by bringing up shared memories, old promises, difficult times you survived together, or sacrifices they claim to have made for you. They may present themselves as lonely, heartbroken, or completely lost, hoping your compassion will reopen the door. If those approaches fail, the strategy may change again. Pressure, emotional intimidation, subtle threats, or attempts to convince others that you were the cruel one may follow instead. Although these behaviors look different, the purpose rarely changes. They want access to you again because, in their mind, restoring that connection also restores the sense of control they believe they have lost. Ironically, these repeated efforts often reveal something they never intended to show. If their confidence and power were truly secure, they would not need to work so hard to win back the attention they claim no longer matters. If their confidence and power were truly secure, they would have no reason to rely on emotional games, guilt, manipulation, or carefully planned tactics. Real strength never depends on convincing someone to stay through pressure or deception. Instead, what often becomes visible is dependence hiding behind the appearance of control. Over time, it becomes clear that they may have relied on your attention far more than you ever relied on theirs. That realization can be deeply unsettling for them because it challenges the image they spent years protecting. From a psychological point of view, these repeated attempts to bring you back reveal something important. They do not necessarily show growth or emotional maturity. More often, they reveal discomfort with the emptiness your absence exposes. When you leave, the image they created of themselves begins to crack. Pulling you back, even for a short time, allows them to avoid looking directly at that uncomfortable reality. Keep watching because the next part explains why kindness alone is sometimes not enough to protect you from repeating the same cycle. This is the stage where emotionally caring people need to be especially careful. Compassion is a beautiful quality, but without healthy boundaries, it can easily become a weakness that others take advantage of. When a narcissist returns appearing sad, apologetic, vulnerable, or full of regret, your natural instinct may be to listen, help, or believe that things have finally changed. That response comes from empathy, and empathy itself is not the problem. The challenge is remembering that wisdom must stand beside compassion. Without it, forgiveness can quietly become a doorway back into the same painful pattern you fought so hard to leave. The most important question is not whether their words sound convincing. The real question is whether their actions consistently show lasting change. Genuine personal growth is rarely quick or dramatic. It requires accountability, honest self-reflection, patience, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Those are exactly the things unhealthy narcissistic patterns usually avoid. What often looks like transformation may simply be desperation, an attempt to reduce the emotional pain caused by your absence rather than true personal growth. Stay with this because the next insight explains why they often struggle to accept a relationship that has truly ended. There is another layer that many people never notice. When they try to pull you back, they are often trying to change the ending itself. A genuine goodbye creates something very powerful. It creates closure. Closure says the chapter has ended and the influence once held over you no longer exists. That finality can feel deeply threatening because it removes their ability to keep the emotional story alive. If they can get you to reply, argue, explain yourself, or reopen old conversations, the ending becomes less clear. Suddenly, they can convince themselves that the relationship is not really over and that they still have a place inside your emotional world. This is why one of the strongest responses is often silence. Not because silence is punishment, but because silence refuses to feed the old pattern. Every explanation becomes something they can challenge. Every emotional response becomes another opportunity to continue the cycle. Quiet distance removes that opportunity completely. It is not weakness. It is a calm decision to stop participating in a pattern that no longer serves your peace. If this message is helping you see things differently, keep watching because the next stage surprises many people.